çağırdılar bizi. Kendileri hakkında kısaca bilgi verecekler ve takdim edecekler. Efendim Stephen Hirtenstein esasen Malatya'da bir İbn Arabi sempozyumuna davetli konuşmacı olarak iştirak etmişlerdi ve İstanbul'daki ziyaretlerinde de bizi ihmal etmediler, davetimizi kabul ettiler ve bugün buradalar. Efendim sözü uzatmayayım. Bu çok kıymetli, kaçırılmayacak fırsatı hep birlikte idrak edelim inşallah. Kıymetli Mahmut Erol Hocam, efendim lütfederseniz...
Evet, merhabalar arkadaşlar, hayırlı sabahlar olsun hepinize. Elif Hanım'ın da söylediği gibi bugün aramızda çok değerli bir arkadaşımız var, İbn Arabi uzmanı. Kendisi Malatya'da yapılmakta olan
Stephen came to Turkey to attend the conference in Malatya. He's a very old friend of mine, and I've known him for about 25 years. And he is one of the leading figures who study on Ibn Arabi, and we have this connection network, and I was asked to introduce him, and I'll try to do my best to be able to introduce him. Steve, as we say shortly, our friend, was born in Birmingham. He studied history. He had his MA on history in Oxford University, and then he pursued his career in various fields. He even worked as an English teacher, among other works. But in terms of his real, main field of study, he is working in the Ibn Arabi within Ibn Arabi Society, and he still is working there. That society is an institution of volunteers. There is, architects. There are architects, professors. It's centered in England, but people who work on Ibn Arabi, friends who work on Arabi, come to that center and work together. What Stephen does in this society is the editing of the journal, the yearly journal, I should say, Journal of the Ibn Arabi Society. That journal is published in English and contains some of the articles written by some professors around the world, and he is the editor of this journal. At the same time, in addition to this work, he actually owns Anka Publishing, and there, mainly on Ibn Arabi, as well as on ancient texts on Tasawwuf in English, is what the Anka Publishing publishes. Masiniazi's English poetry has also been published, for example. One of the works he has, I think one of the most important ones, in my opinion, which is a collaborative work, a project. It's those Sufi masters who have produced abundant number of works. He's working on the proper identification of the manuscripts that are disseminated around the world, which ones are originally scribed by Ibn Arabi and which ones have been lost. So we need to have this very serious work going on, and for the last 15 years, thanks to him, this project is running. He is, wherever those manuscripts are around the world, actually 80% of the manuscripts are available in Turkish libraries. Including his visit right now, he not only attended the Malatya conference, but he also went to the library in Konya, and he's trying to produce a data bank which is actually also accessible in the Ibn Arabi manuscripts of the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society website. It's actually not complete yet, but there will be some further work going on, but they have come so long way so far. So is this really his autography or is it a copy? There is such info entered on the website, and there's a section on the website that has got such information, and there are a lot of contributions by some other prominent professors and thinkers as well, but Stephen is actually running this project. So inshallah, this data bank will be officially launched across the globe. And we also aim at, putting all the manuscripts and the books on this web page. So whichever book a person is interested in, people can actually download or upload that very particular text so that they can have their further study on Ibn Arabi's works. And finally, at the same time, he also has a book on Ibn Arabi's life, which has already been translated in Turkish as well, in the footsteps of Ibn Arabi. By this name, he has actually organized tours following the footsteps of Ibn Arabi across the globe, wherever Ibn Arabi stepped, like Andalusia, in Malatya, in Konya. So we know that Ibn Arabi lived in Malatya for about 10 to 15 years, which is quite a long time. So he has a deep impact on Anatolian land. So one of his very best friends actually died there, buried him there. His son was born in Malatya, and he got married in Malatya. So Ibn Arabi has got a very close connection with Malatya, with Malatya's soil and land. So he also has works related to this as well. And one of his recent works we will be hearing right now. In Ibn Arabi's Futuhat Mecca, even though there are chapters in Futuhat, some sections can be considered as an individual book itself. So if you take that chapter out, you can actually consider it as an individual work. There is one chapter which includes beautiful meanings. Only in this chapter was translated by Stephen with a very long preface and analysis, and he published it by Anka Publishing. And inshallah, the Turkish version will be able to published in Turkish as well. So that is an extract, an excerpt from the Futuhat Mecca, but can be considered as a separate book itself. So we all know Stephen very well. Turkish people know him because he has been coming to Turkey for the last 20-25 years. So this is all I would like to say. But now let's hear about Müdaviül Kulum topic, which is a very important topic, and I hope I will also be benefiting from him. So the stage is yours.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Mahmoud, for a delightful introduction to someone I sort of know. But I want to thank also Karim Güç and Jamal Nur Sargut very much for the invitation to come and talk to you today. This subject is a huge topic and is related to the translation that I've done on this special chapter in Futuhat 167, which is to do with the alchemy of human happiness, Kimia as-Sa'ada, and that is a topic which Al-Ghazali before him had treated. But Ibn Arabi's treatment of this topic is completely different. I'm not really going to talk about the chapter very much. I want to talk about the background to this subject. And I want to begin with an extract from another part of the Futuhat, which is possibly one of the most extraordinary passages in the whole text. It's a description of a very special event or vision which took place. And it took place in Cordoba. And I'd like to read you the translated section. It's a little bit long. And I'm going to give you the original Arabic as well as the English translation of the names that are in here, because they are technical, and maybe one or two of you will know far more about being able to identify these people than I do. Anyway, you will see the problem as we go on. So this is Ibn Arabi's writing. As regards the perfected poles of human communities that have preceded us in time and are other than us, a group of them were mentioned to be by name in the Arabic language. This was when I was given to witness and see them in the imaginal world of the Barzakh. This took place when I was in the city of Cordoba, in a most sanctified witnessing, or place of vision. Among them were the separator, al-Mufarriq, the healer of wounds, Mudawi al-Kulum, the tearful, al-Baka, the elevated, al-Murtafa, the healing remedy, al-Shifa, the effacer, al-Mahiq, the successor, al-Aqib, the sacrificed, al-Manhur, the tree of water, Shajar al-Ma, the origin of life, Unsur al-Hayat, the driver, al-Sharid, the returner, al-Rajia, the constructor, al-Saniya, the flyer, al-Tayyar, the safe and secure, al-Salim, the vicegerent, al-Khalifa, the apportioned, al-Maqsoom, the ever-living, al-Hayy, the thrower, al-Rami, the all-encompassing, al-Wasi', the ocean, al-Bahr, the attached, al-Mulsaq, the guide, al-Hadi, the rectifier, al-Muslih, and the everlasting, al-Baqi. These are the perfected ones whose names were given to me from Adam, upon him be peace, up to the time of Muhammad. May God bless him and greet him with peace. This passage from chapter 14 of Ibn Arabi's Futuhat is remarkable in several ways. It's the first written record of his grand vision in the Andalusian city of Cordoba. He rather enigmatically lists 25 names that clearly indicate the prophetic figures in every single human community prior to the time of Muhammad. But it is unique in portraying them as qualities or activities instead of proper names. These qualities or activities are named only in Arabic, without any further explanation or identification. However, it's clear that they refer to extraordinary activities. And I have to say that my translation is somewhat provisional in English, because as yet I have found no clear way of determining the real meaning of all these names of activity. There isn't a key, for example, to enable a reader to match them up to the names of prophets that are known in the Quran or given, for example, in his Fusus al-Hikam. All that Ibn Arabi makes clear in this context is that these names are all manifestations or instantiations of the spirit of Muhammad, the reality of Muhammad, the reality of realities, the perfect human being, al-insan al-kamil, which extends its support, he says, to all the prophets and messengers and saints from the time of the first human emergence up to the day of resurrection. His purpose in doing so seems to be to point out that from the fullest spiritual perspective, the plurality of realized human beings are like so many names of God, manifestations of a single principle. In other words, according to Ibn Arabi, the reality of the perfect human being, which became known as the reality of Muhammad after his earthly appearance, has appeared in specific ways to different peoples, different human communities, until it reached its final and fullest manifestation in the person of Muhammad. Using the imagery of a wall, we can say that the human reality presented itself as a series of bricks until the final brick brought the wall to completion. The final brick is the completion of the wall in time, but it is also the manifestation of the wall in its entirety, and without it, there is no meaning to the word wall. This is why Ibn Arabi reminds his readers, Muhammad specified that he was a prophet while Adam was between water and clay, which is identical to saying that the reality of the universal human being is prior to, and indeed the very purpose of all creation. At the same time, this human reality expresses itself in every era according to the requirements of the era and the requirements of the people. Its manifest fulfillment in the person of Muhammad is visible in the universality of his prophecy, that it is for all people and all time. That's the context within which Ibn Arabi is describing the group that he calls the perfected poles of the human communities that have preceded us in time. All these figures, human figures, that he saw in the grand vision while he was in Cordoba. Now we know there are many other descriptions of this vision. First of all, a description written some 20 years later in his Fusus al-Hikam, where he says, God informed me and let me witness the essential realities of his messengers, upon them be peace, and his prophets, all the human ones from Adam down to Muhammad. May God bless them all. In a vision in which I found myself in Cordoba in 586. And he goes on to specify that he was talked to by one of the prophets, who he came to know was the prophet Hud. Elsewhere in the Futuhat, he mentions the vision twice more with slightly different details each time. Here is another example. I saw in an essential contemplation all the messengers and prophets. The only one I spoke with in that company was Hud, the brother of Ad. I also saw in another essential contemplation all the people of faith, of Iman, those who have been in the past and those who will be up to the day of resurrection. The real made them appear to me in one and the same place on two different occasions. So we have two visions in Cordoba, one of the prophets and messengers, one of all those who have faith in the prophets and messengers. For the purposes of this talk today, I want to concentrate on the very first account that I read only, because it hasn't received much attention, and particularly I want to focus on one figure. So he describes this vision as taking place in Cordoba in 586, which is 1190 in the Common Era, when he was about 25 years old. And we know from other accounts that this came at the end of a very long retreat. But this event did not take place in this world. In one sense, it didn't take place in Cordoba. It takes place in the presence of the Barzakh, the world of imagination, where spirits take on form and forms take on meanings. Perhaps we can say that this event cannot take place in this world. It occurs in an invisible realm that most people are unaware of, a world that is protected by its own inherent sanctity. The vision occurs, he says, in a most sanctified place of witnessing, a place that is totally present, but essentially hidden and access denied unless God wishes to grant it to one of his friends. Furthermore, this list includes all human prophets and messengers from beginning to end, each one representing their community, and that includes every human being. As the Quran declares, to each one of you we have assigned a path and a way of coming. Had God willed, he could have made you one community. The fact that Ibn Arabi was introduced to these messengers and prophets only through Arabic words denoting their function or activity shows that we are being presented with a very special group. They are incessantly at work, building, constructing, like a colony of bees, drawing out the sweet nectar from creation and producing the honey of inspiration. But they are an army of specialists who guide, heal, water, rectify, and so on. Many of these functions are certainly to be found in the life of Muhammad himself. For example, the thrower, al-Rami, immediately brings to mind the famous incident at the Battle of Badr, when Muhammad threw dust in the direction of the enemy to startling effect, and which is mentioned in the famous Quranic verse, "You did not throw when you threw, it was God who threw." So bearing in mind all of this, I'm now going to concentrate on the second name in the list, the healer of wounds, Mudawi al-Kulum. He appears after the separator, al-Mufarriq, the one who sets in motion the numerical series and who can be identified with two people, either Adam or perhaps more likely his son Seth. If we think of it as Adam, then maybe we should remember the prophet's meeting with Adam in the Miraj in the first heaven, in which Muhammad discovers that the blessed people of the right and the blessing-less people of the left are actually on the right and the left of Adam. in relation to Adam, every human being, even Muhammad, is separated or differentiated on the right or on the left, waxing or waning, if you like the imagery of the moon. The Adamic principle is essentially separative, because he was taught the names, and the names are differentiated and differentiating, complementary opposites. However, from the perspective of Ibn Arabi, we can also see this separative principle demonstrated in the person of Adam's son, Seth, whose wisdom in the Fusus is nafathiyya, breathing out, in reference to the divine breath of compassion through which all the names are differentiated. So this is just to give you an example of how difficult it can be to identify a particular prophetic figure with one of these names. They are enigmatic, so what I'm going to say now is to do with Mudawi al-Kulum, the healer of wounds, and I think the identification is quite secure because there are various clues that were given, not only in this text but in other texts. Strangely, this Mudawi al-Kulum, healer of wounds, is the only one mentioned elsewhere in the Futuhat. But who exactly is he? What are the wounds? And how does he heal? So Ibn Arabi, in this same chapter, goes on to say, his name was the healer of wounds. He is an expert in all the woundings caused by subjective passion, hawa, personal opinion, ray, this world, dunya, Satan, shaitan, and the soul, nafs. He is knowledgeable of the language of every prophet, messenger, or friend. He possessed compassionate vision of the place of his body's birth in Mecca, as well as of Ash-Sham. Then his gaze was turned to an earth that was extremely hot and dry, where none of the children of Adam could go in their physical body. And here's the important punchline. We ourselves have taken abundant knowledge from him in a different manner to other people. So we have wounds caused by 5 specific human difficulties. Hawa, subjective love, personal passion, or what we could call low-level sub-cardiac desire. Ray, personal opinion, individual, supracardiac, intellectual judgment, something that people in universities are expected to have, especially used in Islamic law in terms of interpreting the Quran and the Sunnah. Dunya, this world, this low world in contrast to the hereafter. Shaitan, Satan, a name which Ibn Arabi says is derived from distance. Nafs, soul, specifically an-nafs al-amara, the soul that commands to evil. Interestingly, 4 of these 5 are mentioned in a passage in Ibn Arabi's Kitab al-Isfar as special problems in terms of the voyage of salvation, which is the voyage of Noah, where he cites the divine voice saying, "Who are you that the real should descend to you in such a way, especially from the station of the me, the divine me? Your soul that commands to evil, your Satan, your world, your passion, do not cease to mock you as long as you are building this ark, this construction of your salvation." In other words, we can't be free of these problems until our protective ark is built, our Noah's Ark. But there is an extra difficulty, which Ibn Arabi is mentioning in the context of healer of wounds, ray or personal opinion. We'll see later it's very, very important in this context. So now we have a very unusual name, Mudawi al-Kulum, and one can't help but notice a rhythmic similarity with Jawami al-Kalim, the special prerogative of the Prophet Muhammad in synthesizing all the previous divine revelatory words. Incidentally, very difficult to translate into English, Jawami al-Kalim, but I guess that you understand it much more easily in the Arabic. Not only does the phrase Mudawi al-Kulum echo the phrasing of Jawami al-Kalim, but the root of the last word in both of them is identical. It comes from kalama. Ibn Arabi himself links the two ideas of kulum, wounds, and kalim, words, in a particular passage when he says that speaking, kalam, is the attribute that brings about effects in the compassionate breath. It is derived, this word kalam is derived from the word wound, kalm, which means injuring someone by cutting. That is why we say speaking brings about an effect, like the mark of a wound on a body that is cut open. The first word to cleave, to cut through the hearing of possible things is the word kun, be. And the world only manifests through the attribute of speech. End of quote. In other words, there is a very special connection in Ibn Arabi's teaching, inherent in the English language and certainly not in English, between wound and word, where cutting the skin reveals what lies below the surface, just as words open up hidden meaning. In both cases, injury can happen, but they share a revelatory quality. So this healer of wounds possesses a universality very similar to Muhammad's, able to reveal the real meaning of suffering, just as Muhammad reveals the inner meaning of all revelation. This connection between wound and word seems to be one of the reasons that Ibn Arabi specifies that this medical expert, who can treat the 5 types of psychic wounding suffered by human beings, is an expert in all the prophetic languages. As he says, he is knowledgeable of the language of every prophet, messenger, or friend. It's as if he possesses a universal language for speaking to human beings, whatever their condition. Physically, we're told his birthplace is Mecca, the center of the world in Islamic terms, but he also has a special vision or outlook on his own entry point into the world and of Ash-Sham. Well, it's a rather vague term in Arabic because Bilad Ash-Sham literally means the land on the left or to the north. We would normally take it to mean Greater Syria, including Damascus, which can also be Ash-Sham, but it would also include Jerusalem with its holy house, Beit al-Muqaddas. Now, this northerly quality often has a negative tinge, cold winds, evil omens, calamity, disaster. We are witnessing it in our world today. In other words, this healer must have special experience of the world of human suffering without being removed from his perspective as the man at the center in Mecca. he can also gaze at the desert. Apparently, unflinchingly, nobody else can do this. What is this pointing to? Something about his own nature. We might call it a solar nature. Just a little footnote, Ibn Arabi strangely goes on to say there are others who follow in the mystery of this wise man or prophet, and he's been known by different names at different times. The last of them he names as the bringer of wisdom, and he says, I think this may be Luqman, but he's not sure. In the next chapter, chapter 15, we meet the healer of wounds again in a different context. This is a chapter concerned with the knowledge of the divine breaths and the knowledge and mysteries of their poles, those who have realized these breaths. What he means by spiritual breaths here is the fragrant sense of divine closeness. And it suggests an image of the breath of the merciful, Nafas ar-Rahman, which the Prophet says comes to me from the Yemen. So now we have the south as opposed to the north. Ibn Arabi describes how al-Arifun, the Arif, the people of direct inner experience, are inwardly aroused by inhaling some of this divine fragrance which wafts towards them from the realm of reality. That is, they are aroused by these southerly Yemeni breezes of mercy, but they suffer from the northerly winds that bring affliction. They feel their separateness, they feel their lack of knowledge, and therefore they suffer. So they seek out somebody who knows things as they really are, who can impart to them whatever they need for their own salvation and happiness. In short, a genuine spiritual teacher who can heal their wounds. Someone who has Asham, the suffering place in his sights, but who abides at the Meccan center. And then Ibn Arabi says, and I quote, they are made acquainted with a divine individual, one who possesses the secret they are looking for and the knowledge they desire. The real raises him up amongst them as a pole, around whom their spiritual ship sails, and a leader through whom their possessions are set in order. He is called the healer of wounds, and he disseminates among them knowledge, wisdom, and mysteries that cannot be contained in a book. So he's not only a healer, capable of speaking universally, he is also a divine individual, a pole of knowledge, someone who disseminates wisdom that cannot be contained in a book. Gradually, the contour of this person is becoming a little clearer. Especially so when Ibn Arabi goes on to talk about this person's special knowledge of the mystery of time in all its cycles, his special knowledge of alchemical transformation, how iron becomes silver through the alchemist's art, how iron becomes gold by the way of privateness, al-khasiyya, which is actually a shorthand for a technical piece of Ibn Arabi's vocabulary, what I translate as the private face, al-wajh al-khas. This is the direct connection that there exists between each being, each created being, whether human or not, and their creator. And he calls this, incidentally, a most wondrous mystery, because if a person comes to understand this, then they are always, at each moment, directly connected to him. Well, let's come back to a healer of wounds, who is all of these things. Both alchemy and astronomy, or astrology, are subjects that are well known within the specific remit of the mysterious figure of Idris, who for Ibn Arabi is the prophetic Qutb, the pole, whose spiritual authority is manifest in the fourth heaven of the sun, center of the heavens, and who represents the rising solar power of the East. According to Ibn Arabi, and I quote, he is said to have been the first among the sons of Adam to write with a pen. So the first spiritual outpouring of the supreme pen belongs to him, peace be upon him. He was made to voyage until he reached the seventh heaven, so all of the heavens were in his compass. End of quotation. After spending time in the high world of the angels and gaining knowledge of all the heavens and how they influence the earth, and after coming to know that a flood was coming, quote, he descended and selected from among the sons of his religion and his way those whom he knew possessed sharpness of mind and perspicacity. He taught them what he'd contemplated and the mysteries that God has deposited in the high world. He wanted to preserve this knowledge for those who would come after them, so he ordered it to be inscribed on rocks and stones. End of quote. It's interesting, Ibn Arabi is very particular about a word. So when we see a word like rocks and stones, it may have no association necessarily for us. But sukhur, rocks, immediately brings to mind sakhra, the black stone in the Kaaba. The rock of Jerusalem. The word he's using for stones, hajar, immediately brings to mind the black stone in the Kaaba. So, both of these are said to have come from paradise. So here we've got a link with how they came, how they were written on. So he's alluding to the Idrisian origin of these two most sacred Abrahamic places in the Middle East, Jerusalem and Mecca, as well as to yet another culture, the more evident stone hieroglyphs of Egypt. But there's a very curious thing in Ibn Arabi. So on the one hand, he says he's the first to write with a pen. On the other side, his writing is not necessarily what we would consider writing. It's not an artifact written as language in books. It's carved as image speech into the sacred places of this world. It's also written onto rock and stone, substances that can be alchemically transformed into gold. Well, I won't go into the wonders of writing in human culture, except to say that in all cultures it's regarded as divine in origin, from the elephant god Ganesh in India, who broke off his tusk to write, to the Egyptian god Thoth, the god of knowledge and wisdom, the scribe of the gods, and the author of all the priestly knowledge in Egypt. And we even find the Norse god Odin, who learned to decipher the runes that are found in the fathomless depths, and who also knew how to heal emotional and bodily wounds. So we have a very strong connection in lots of cultures between this idea of healing and writing. Just for the translator, I'm going to jump and just say a little bit about Ibn Arabi's perspective on Idris. He represents the transcendent human being at the center of things, unmoved and unmoving. He is the axis, the kutub, around which everything revolves. He's also one of the four ever-living ones who never tastes death. So he knows about reviving the dead in a similar way to Khidr, and like Jesus was taken physically out of this level of human existence. He's able to combine, as we've seen, whatever is above and whatever is below, angelic and human. He knows the wisdom of rotation and movement, and so on. He's equally, and this is perhaps the most important part of the aspect of healer of wounds, the divine instructor who brings about the return of those who have the inner capacity. He is therefore the exemplar of all spiritual teaching, as well as the preserver of knowledge for future generations. And I have to say we've come a long way from the very, very brief mention of Idris in the Quran, where he's mentioned once as a Siddiq, a man of truth, a prophet whom we raised up to a high place, and once as one of the Sabirin, one of the steadfast ones. There is a whole week's seminar necessary to explain how Idris and Hermes Trismegistos are related to each other, and the huge influence of Hellenistic influence on Arab culture in the early centuries of Islam, particularly as regards the occult, which has been called a hidden knowledge of hidden truths and powers. Hermes, incidentally, just so you know, is not considered to be one person, but is more like a title, like a Caesar. And there were, usually they identified three of them. One who was an Egyptian, who founded human religion before the flood, ascended to the heavenly spheres and returned to instruct his people, clearly Idris-like. He's also the one who built the pyramids. There's another one who is said to have lived after the flood in Babylon and instructed Pythagoras. And there's a later one in Egypt who wrote books and taught alchemy, medicine, and other sciences to Asclepius, the Greek god of medicine. So we have a huge complex of teaching associated with Hermes and the Hermetic tradition. But all of them come under or can be related to, the principle of Idris. Let me return now to the healer of wounds and his ability to heal, which is a function of being the pole, and also his special connection to this chapter that I've translated. So as we've seen, his teaching is essentially alchemical. That means a whole psychomedical tradition, since healing or medicine of the body was understood in medieval times as very much a sister science to the sacred art of alchemy, which was to do with the healing of the spirit. The normal view, common view of alchemy is that it is a pseudoscience, a kind of medieval precursor to modern chemistry, and we can now leave it all behind. And when people talk about it, they often talk about things that are very fragmentary, mysterious, occult, and some people think this is a wonderful thing to be interested in and start to read texts which are extremely elusive. For Ibn Arabi, alchemy is an extremely important principle in the transformation of the human being from what he calls bashar, ordinary human being, to insan, real human being. So in other words, what we see as human beings is the possibility of a human being, not degenerate necessarily, but a human being that has not realized their full potential. Alchemy, or alchemical transformation, is a way of describing the return path to human happiness or fulfillment, which is summarized in the image of gold. Spiritual alchemy, he says, is the very principle of human earthly existence. It has no other meaning. It is the crucible within which all transformation takes place. Ultimately, he says, all happiness lies in knowing Allah, the name that unites all the beautiful names, which means that the real aim of the spiritual journey is not simply transformation or personal fulfillment, but the attainment of perfection, completion, kemal. As he writes in this chapter 167, not everyone who has found happiness is given perfection. For while all who are perfect are happy, not every happy one is perfect. Perfection means reaching and joining with the highest degree, and that is assuming the likeness of the source, of the origin. He conceives of alchemy as in two different ways. First, it's a very difficult word to translate into English, insha, something like origination. It's a creative process by which things come into being according to their inherent nature. So a tree is a tree. It starts as a seed and it grows according to its nature. Nothing can stand in its way. It will express itself fully as a tree. The second kind of alchemy is to do with the elimination of defect and ailment, in which the natural process of development has been hampered by some kind of sickness or ill health, and this can only be restored by a therapeutic intervention. So in medieval times, metals were considered to grow in the earth and mature, just like plants, animals, humans do on the surface of the earth. So lead or tin, if you find them in the earth, are really defects that the original metallic ore has suffered on its way to becoming gold. So to eliminate the defect requires the special art of the alchemist, who understands the cosmic order of the heavens and the earth and who works with it for things to be brought back into balance and for completion to be attained. So whether it is the metallic ore that has ossified in the stage of copper or iron, or the human being that cannot get beyond being enslaved by their desires or enthralled to their intellect, the alchemical healer, this spiritual teacher, Mudawi al-Kulum, who educates from the heart, tackles the problem by applying the appropriate corrective elixir in order for the golden state of perfection to be realized. And for those of you who may be therapists or interested in therapy, only the person who possesses perfect inner balance can heal the sick. Puts us all on the spot if you're into therapy. Somewhere else we get a clue as to what this kind of heart medicine might be, but in a very, very different context. The context is backbiting or defamation, in Arabic, ghiba. Generally, he says, it's a very bad thing to talk about somebody else negatively behind their back, especially if the person who was to hear it and feel injured or wounded. However, strangely, there are cases where it's a good thing. For example, these are the examples he gives. In the field of Hadith transmission, suppose that somebody has falsely attributed a Hadith to the Prophet. It is absolutely right to criticize them, whether they're there or not. Or, and this I say as a teacher with some experience of this, if a teacher gives negative feedback about a student without them being present, when it would actually benefit them if they heard it. In other words, what he's saying is that there is a positive quality about apparently negative things if you stand up for what is true, what is real, and separate yourself from the falsehood. And then he makes a very interesting general remark. I quote, God has created no sickness, da, without creating for it a cure, dawa. Very beautiful little pun in Arabic. There are two kinds of medicine. A general medicine, which everybody can take, and a kingly medicine, which only the kings and the rich can take. What on earth is he talking about? He says the general medicine is repentance, tawbah, returning to God. Oh, so we're in a different context. What is the kingly medicine? It is only taken by the people of immediate knowledge, these arifun, the ones for whom God is their hearing and their seeing and their tongues, the very ones that the healer of wounds came to teach in the first place. This kingly medicine, he says, is taqwa, usually translated as godliness or piety or some such, but actually means taking God as one's protective shield against all blameworthy situations, including backbiting. Now, here he inserts a little sentence. The real does not become a protection for the servant until the servant is wholly enveloped by him. The form of his being enveloped is that the real becomes his hearing, his tongue, and all his faculties and limbs as regards the particular sphere of action and capacity they possess. Then the servant becomes wholly light. It's a wonderful description of alchemy and the result of this alchemical transformation. We have a characteristic distinction between a general understanding and behavior, which is applicable to everybody, tawbah. If you don't know what to do, turn to him. It's not so much repentance as the usual translations, but turning to God. And the more deep, integrated knowledge and action enjoyed by God's friends, who recognize already that God is the only actor. In this case, even backbiting is good for the servant who has to suffer it, a bit like the benefit which is gained by taking medicine which tastes disgusting, but the medicine does its work. Anyway, God, he says, Ibn Arabi, on the day of resurrection, God will bring about reconciliation between his servants. So the wronged one will see some of the good that has come to him at the hand of his brother, for which he will be grateful to him, and then the two of them will be blessed. This kind of transformative unveiling, which releases perceived rights and wrongs, is precisely an example of the healer of wounds at work. And I'm sure many of you who study psychology or psychiatry can find modern examples of the same principle. Another way of understanding this journey of human transformation is in terms of ascension, mi'raj, and return. Although commonly understood to be an imitation of Muhammad's night journey, the first insight into its meaning in human terms is given by Idris's elevation to a high place. Idris is the first prophet to be manifested as taken up after the fall or descent of Adam. So there is a clear link between the healing of wounds or the elimination of defects and the elevation of the human being to their rightful place as the likeness of the source. And Ibn Arabi, for this reason, divides the chapter 167 into two parts, one about alchemy at the beginning, one about ascension, which is the real topic I think he wants to get to in the second part. There's another feature of this special chapter. Unlike other biographical or autobiographical accounts, in other words, where Ibn Arabi is talking either about the story of the Prophet's Miraj and going into it, which is in chapter 367, or his own autobiographical ascension in the footsteps of the Prophet, also in the same chapter. Here, in 167, we have two individuals. It's a rather odd kind of exposition, a bit like a novel. The ascension is a journey made by two figures. I don't want to call them people because they're not people ordinarily. Importantly, he specifies two people. Well, he starts off saying two men, and then he says, but it can be a man and a woman or two women, doesn't matter. In other words, we're not talking about gender, it's two figures. The first is, he calls a follower who relies on being taught by the divine instructor, and the second is a speculative thinker, a philosopher, someone who relies on their individual judgment and personal opinion with regard to truth and what they do in life. And the two characters, as they ascend, and they both ascend, they receive very different treatment. So the follower meets Adam in the first heaven, and so on, all the other prophets in their heavens, and benefits from their unlimited wisdom. The other one, the speculative thinker, cannot meet the human representation in this place. What they meet is the planet. This goes back to a whole Hellenistic, Neoplatonic view of this ascension. He meets the planet, and he's increasingly trapped in his own selfhood. He can't go beyond the seventh heaven at all, and by the time he gets to the seventh heaven, he has a real crisis, an ontological crisis, where he's left in a little room which is desolate, empty, dark, deserted, and he's told, this is the house of your nafs. You stay here until I come and collect you. And he says, but I want to embrace Islam. I believe now. This is a terrible place to be. And he's told, well, if you want to do all that, go back to the beginning and start again. In other words, one of the specific problems that Ibn Arabi is representing in this kind of strange journey of these two figures is the problem of ray, of subjective personal opinion. And we're given tremendous insight into the limitations of the human mind, or the ordinary mind, as compared with the unlimited capacity inherent in the purified heart. So that relates very directly to the discrepancy between what Ibn Arabi sees as Idris's original message and the way that it's been understood by successive generations, which we might call the Hermetic tradition. We have a very precious little autobiographical piece of information that he gave to his student Ibn Sawdakin in a conversation. And he says, I, meaning Ibn Arabi, I proceed in accordance with how the Idrisian reality has been unveiled to me. This came about when I examined the condition of the philosophers and the traditions that they pass on about him, meaning Idris, and the way they have formed different opinions about him. I said to myself, well, I prefer to take this matter directly from him and understand what has caused them to go wrong. So I went into a retreat for 36 days, and I came to know the matter from Idris exactly as it is. I saw how error had affected the ancients because of their own souls. This was because they related what he had said, then they interpreted it, and they held different opinions about it. This is exactly the same as the way the hadith of the Prophet have come to us. One person declares permissible what another person says is forbidden, based on their capacity to understand what he said. Normally, Idris's prophethood is thought to have occurred in a particular time which we call henotheistic or monolatrous, I can hardly say it. It's where there was a single god worshipped alongside the existence of many, many other gods. A bit like the situation in Mecca at the time of the Prophet's birth. But Ibn Arabi is talking really about a different kind of situation. He's talking about the spiritual reality of Idris. And he makes clear that this wisdom that Idris imparts, which cannot be contained in a book, is the knowledge of Tawheed. Again, a very difficult word to translate into English. Could be unity or affirmation of unity. Not a religious formula, not something you say, not even a monotheistic concept where you say, well, I believe in unity, some abstract concept, but a universal reality that human beings are capable of witnessing and living, but need reminding of. In Ibn Arabi's own Ascension, Idris actually says to him, I was a prophet calling them to the word of Tawheed, not to Tawheed itself, because no one has ever denied Tawheed. It's impossible. There is only the divine, and the divine speaking with himself. This is Tawheed. I was calling them to the word of Tawheed. We did not say what we communicated to people from God on the basis of reasoning, nazar, this very important word. We only said it on the basis of a single direct relationship with him. So this single direct relationship echoes the idea of the private face, al-wajh al-khas, which Ibn Arabi describes as the elixir of the knowers, the elixir of the arif. In this passage, Ibn Arabi alludes to the fact that Idris's teaching was actually divinely dictated and subsequently misunderstood precisely because human beings were trying to understand it through their rational faculty, through their nazar. The knowledge taught by Mudawi al-Kulum is not something Idris himself learned by dhawq, direct experience or taste, or even hal, state, which can be acquired. He learnt it only by being divinely informed through unveiling, kashf. Well, now we have an odd situation. He mentions he went into a retreat for 36 days. If you look in all the books, you'll never find a retreat of 36 days that I've ever heard of. So I started to wonder, very strange number. Why? In another chapter of Futuhat, and this is where you have to do a little bit of detective work, you discover there are 36 specific forms of Tawheed, of the ipseity, of the huwiyah, that are found in the Quran. That is, a specific form of remembrance, of dhikr, including the form La ilaha illahu. Occasionally, we have, in one or two cases, another La ilaha illa anta, there's no God but you, or La ilaha illa ana, even this one, which is the Moses one. Each of these 36 forms of Tawheed are described as arising from the Nafas ar-Rahman, the breath of the compassionate. Again, we notice breath in the context of dhikr. Now, interesting. Why 36? 36 is 1/10 of the degrees of the zodiac. 1/10 is the zakat, the charitable tithe, which is God's due. Out of all the 360, 36, 1/10 belongs to Him. There are many other aspects. For example, what is the 36th chapter in the Quran? It is Yaseen, traditionally regarded as the heart of the Quran. Maybe it's no coincidence that the two letters of this strange surah, Yaseen, they're found in Idris's name. 36 is also the abjad value of ilah, Alif, Laam, Ha, meaning God, or that which is divine. So the number itself is pointing to whatever human beings take as a way of worship, whatever is worshipped as divine. In one respect, that is the primordial religion prior to any religion of the book. So we have to understand that from Ibn Arabi's perspective, humans are inherently, totally spiritual creatures. We are all inherently oriented towards worship, to finding meaning in life. Otherwise we couldn't exist here. Not all religions are outwardly theistic, but they are all founded on the more than human appreciation of the ineffable reality or unity underlying every moment, every state, every viewpoint. So I want to finish with the poem that Ibn Arabi gives in chapter 15 of the Futuhat. At the beginning of every chapter in Futuhat there is a poem which Ibn Arabi says actually this poem summarizes the meaning of the chapter. So chapter 15 is about the breaths and the finding of this divine instructor and having your wounds healed. And in many ways this poem summarizes the kind of human predicament in the face of the mystery of the divine that is revealed in each moment and which is realized by the prophets and friends of God. And you'll forgive me for not reading in Arabic, but I don't have it here. But anyway, my Arabic is not so wonderful. I'll read in English. The world of breaths is part of my breath. The poles are the highest authority in sanctity. Their chosen one, an eloquent master given inspiration with the ringing of the bell. I said to the gatekeeper when he saw me, "How I'm suffering at the hand of the guards." He asked me, "What is it you seek, my child?" I replied, "Closeness to the master of healing wisdom. Who will intercede for me with the imam? Maybe a passing visit from him for one who would steal a glance?" The gatekeeper said, "He does not bestow his gifts of knowledge on one who is self-sufficient, ghani, unafflicted by sorrow and suffering." Thank you very much. Of course, if you like. You're going to show the book?
Hocamıza sormak istediğimiz bir soru olabilir mi? Soruları kabul edecekler kendileri ve burada dinleme şansına eriştiğimiz ve duayla ilgili olarak hazırlanmış olan eser burada. Efendim onu da takdim etmek istedim. Belki daha sonrasında Türkçe'ye çevirme imkanı da olabilir inşallah. Kıymetli hocamın da bu yönde bir tavsiyeleri oldu. Efendim biraz size düşünme payı vermek için bu birkaç lafı da ettim doğrusu. Var mı hocamıza yöneltmek istediğiniz sorularınız? Sorunuz var mıydı?
Öncelikle hoş geldiniz hocam.
Hoş bulduk.
Demiştiniz ki La ilahe illa ene, La ilahe illa ente. Acaba biraz açıklayabilir misiniz?
Hey. La ilaha illa ana. There is no God but me, this divine me. This was said to Moses. You will find in the Quran, I don't remember the exact reference, but when he was addressed face to face, there is no God but me. Very interestingly, by the way, if you look at the text, 3 times this me is mentioned, 3 times in the sentence, in one way or another, in the Arabic. So it's a mosaic form of Tawheed. This is the address of the divine me, but to who? Who is he talking to? That's an interesting question because Moses is big subject. La ilaha illa anta is Subhanaka la ilaha illa anta inni kuntu min az-zalimin. This is the saying of Yunus, Jonah, when he is addressing the divine. So this time it's not the divine addressing the human, but the human addressing the divine directly. I'm one of those who have I'm oppressed. It's not possible to oppress God, but you can oppress your own reality. So this state of realization that you are oppressing yourself, your own reality, and realizing that this is a gift to be shown how you're doing it, then you can say this Jonah prayer, which is the release from it, the great relief. So it's a great prayer used in distress, for example.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Şiirin en son cümlesini hatırlayamadım. Şiirin en son cümlesini.
Me too. It's a fantastic last line. So just to say, this poem is really about I'm a seeker. I want to see and be healed by this. I know there's this person. How is it going to happen? Please, please. Maybe such a person is going to just walk by, and then I can get them to look at me, steal a glance, he actually says in the Arabic, which is a very curious thing to say. So then this gatekeeper says, he does not bestow his gifts of knowledge on someone who is self-sufficient. So the word he's using here is to do with you feel independent in some way. You have a self, you think. Unafflicted by sorrow and suffering. So the sorrow and the suffering is from him. It is designed to bring you back to him. That's its purpose. So we usually try to run away from suffering, we try to avoid suffering, but here he's saying, well, why? Because actually the suffering is the very ingredient, the alchemical ingredient for this bestowal of real knowledge, of really seeing what your situation is. Which language am I in?
Stephen, I don't want to mess with the spirituality that you created, but I just want to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about the work of the society, so we know a little bit more about the Ibn Arabi Society and the journal?
Sure. So the society was established just over 40 years ago by a small group of people who were interested in Ibn Arabi and his works and had been studying in English but could find very little material to read that was published. At that time there were only two books in English. One was a collection of poems by Ibn Arabi called Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, these wonderful love poems, which had been translated in 1911, I think, long ago, century ago. And the other book was something that was a very popular book called Sufis of Andalusia, translated by Ralph Austin, and gave basically biographical stories of Ibn Arabi's time in Andalusia. This is part of a much bigger book, which hasn't really been properly translated into English yet. It's essentially a book about the relationship of a person with their own soul and how the spirit informs the soul. So out of that, the fundamental idea was to encourage the publication of works by Ibn Arabi in English, because everybody knew there was a treasure waiting to be discovered, as they say, a hidden treasure. And over the last 40 years, pretty much the same group of people have been working in order to establish conferences by bringing people from different areas of life, different perspectives together. Jamal Nur Hoja has come and talked to us in Oxford. We hold one conference, an annual conference in Oxford, and an annual conference in America somewhere, usually Berkeley, but can be in New York, or it's a traveling menagerie. And on top of that, we established a journal so that we could publish shorter articles by different scholars. Mahmoud Bey has had various articles in there, and this has been the basis for a whole new generation of study, because in most universities it's extremely difficult, in the West, extremely difficult to study Sufism properly. There are either very few qualified academics or professors who are interested, or there's actual antagonism to the whole idea of Sufism, because in the modern world, Sufism, for some people, is something old, outdated, etc. I don't need to go into that story. But the Society's work has been to try to establish, particularly in English, which is, as it were, a universal language, in inverted commas, something that would act like an umbrella for everybody interested in Ibn Arabi. Now, there might be one person working on Ibn Arabi in Bangladesh, on their own, but through the internet and through emails and so on, that person is in contact with other people interested. And that's the kind of function of the Society, to bring together people who otherwise would be quite isolated in their own community or country, and often working maybe in situations where, I don't need to tell you, there are certain countries in the world where the teachings of Ibn Arabi cannot be even talked about openly because there's so much antagonism towards it. Currently, there is a big debate, for example, in Jordan, big debate about Ibn Arabi's teaching. Is he heretical or not? I mean, this is kind of old stuff, because in most cases, people are not reading the material. They are utilizing debates that are much later and don't really have an application. So the Society's work is to try to provide a platform for people to come and talk, exchange views, and also do research. So one of my hats has been, as Mahmoud Bey explained earlier, to do a lot of research on the manuscripts that survive and try to produce good editions of the texts based on these best manuscripts. Well, the best manuscripts are all over the place, 80% probably in Turkey, but some are in private collections, some are in, you may find one very good copy in Russia, another very good copy in Princeton. They're all over the place. So we're trying to build an archive and catalogue and cross-reference all these different things so that there's some proper established knowledge of what did Ibn Arabi write. If we know what he wrote, then we can study it, and it can be translated. And personally, I have no doubt at all that the translation of these books into other languages than Arabic is absolutely fundamental for not just the study of Ibn Arabi, but fundamental for the study of what it means to be human and how to deal with the challenges we face in the world today. And it's critical that we utilize all this wisdom and teaching as best we possibly can for the situation that we all face. And I could go on for hours, so I better not. But many things to be said about that. But the Society is. And anyone can join. Yes, the Society is open to anyone. That's also the fundamental part of it. It's not run by a particular group or this, that, the other. It's a very open situation. We've had tremendous support over the years from people like James Morris, William Chittick, and so on, working in the field, and also tremendous support from the general interested public, some of whom are academics, but some of whom are not academic. You don't need to be particularly intellectually trained in order to understand this material. This material is dynamite, but it can affect people very directly without the need for intellectual, I have to learn all about 13th century Islamic theology and philosophy. Yes, if you like. But actually Ibn Arabi's teaching is not about that. It's about how to be a human being in the fullest sense, in the broadest sense. So in Spain, for example, a branch of the society was established some years ago by my colleague and friend Pablo Beneto, Mias Latina, he called it, so that things could be put into Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, all the Latin languages, and they could do some extra work. Of course, they have their own personal connection, because Ibn Arabi is born in Murcia, in southeastern Spain, and they are doing fantastic work in Italy and Spain, many conferences, and they are particularly interested in the artistic aspect. So it's not just a kind of intellectual thought. It's how does it translate into painting, into art forms of other kinds, all of which can be informed by the same principles.
Hoş geldiniz. Hoş geldiniz. 36 gün inzivaya çekilmesi konusu bendenize enteresan geldi. Genelde halveti 40 gün diyebiliriz. 36 gün rakamı sizin de ilginizi çekip araştırmışsınız. Şimdi ben de kafamda deminden beri dolanıyor siz söyledikten sonra 36 rakamı ne ola ki acaba diye. Nikola Tesla diyor ki 3, 6 ve 9'un sırrını bilenler, çözenler evrenin de sırrını çözmüş olurlar. Şimdi bu rakamlarda bir enteresanlık olsa gerek diye düşünmekteyim. Şimdi 3 rakamı affınıza sığınıyorum. Arap gramerini ben de çok bilmiyorum. Ama kesretin 3'ten başladığını, 3 rakamıyla başladığını, Arapça gramerde de bu şekilde geçtiğini bir yerlerde duymuştum. 6 günde de Allah-u Teala evreni yarattıysa eğer 6 tabaka ya da yaratış aşaması şeklinde düşünürsek, hani otomatikman şey diye düşündüm ben. 3 kesretin başlangıcı aslında kesreti ve sonrasında bu 6 günde yaratılan bu aşamaları kendi bünyesinde 9'a tamamlayıp birlemek ve sonra da 9'dan sonra gelen bir rakamı 10, 1 ve 0, 0'ın zaten hükmü yok. 1'e ulaşmak, Yaseen suresi de insanı kamil, hani kendi bünyesinde tüm kesreti ve bu yaratılış tabakalarını kendi bünyesinde birleyip o tek bir noktada toplayan insanı kamile mi işaret var? Ya da o insanı kamile ulaşmanın yol haritası bu mudur acaba diye bendenize bazı çağrışımlar yaptı. Bilmiyorum, belki de tamamen hayali bir şey söylüyorum. Olabilir mi diye düşündüm. Fikrinizi alabilir miyim? Teşekkür ederim.
Just let me say some general remarks about numbers. For Ibn Arabi, the world of numbers is a complete universe parallel to the world of letters, parallel to the cosmos itself, to this world. Every world, in that sense, can be connected to something in one of the other worlds, because it is a complete system. So the world of numbers is a very curious world. I better get technical. The number 3 is the first prime number in the sense of real numbers, because 1 is not a number, 1 is the principle of number. 2 is simply the mirroring of the 1 without there being relationship. So 3 is the first number where there is relationship between 1 and itself. This is why it's a supremely important number and the first of numerical series in the concept of Ibn Arabi. So, for example, the chapter of Muhammad in the Fusus al-Hikam is the wisdom of Fardiya, Fard. The first Fard number, very difficult word to translate, usually translated as singular, but that's a little bit different in English. It means the first, it has to be odd on the one side, and it has to be unique on the other side. So this, when we look at prime numbers, I know, for example, that in the new translation of Futuhat in English, done by Eric Winkle, he is translating Fard as prime. So prime numbers are a remarkable thing. You know what I mean by a prime number. A number which is only divisible by itself or one. It can't be divided. So 3, 5, 7, so on. These numbers are in a way within the world of numbers like the prophets and messengers, because before they arrive, you don't know what a prime number is. There is no way of determining a prime number before you get to it. You only know it once it arrives. So it's like the arrival of something new into the world, unexpected, unforeseen, but once it's arrived, it becomes part of the known. At the moment, I can't remember the extent that they've discovered of prime numbers, but they now use very sophisticated computers to actually work out what's the biggest prime number. It's incredibly complicated. So we've got maybe a prime number this long now, and they're looking for the next one, because they know there will be one somewhere, but they don't know where it is. So that's an analogy for the prophetic figures who have appeared in this world, who we know the names of. But before they appeared, we had no idea what they would bring or who they were. They were in the invisible world. So now, going back to your question about 36, therefore, it's a little bit complicated, because certainly 36 is a number in its own right, and it is also 6 sixes, 3 12s, etc., etc. In other words, divisible by different numbers, each of which can be subdivided, maybe, like 4 nines are 36, so that means 2 times 2 times 3 times 3, if you get back to the prime part of it. So that's the constituent element of 36. Now, you have to look at numbers not in connection to another world, but look at them within the world in which they exist and how they operate. So become a mathematician, if you like. And then look at the spirituality or the inner meaning of this, how they relate to each other. It's a very complex thing. You can also relate it to letters. Like I explained, Ilah is 36. The number 36 is Ilah. So you can do it that way. I don't think that just taking 3 and just taking 6 and saying, suggest this, is a very fruitful way. But I will say, if you start to look at the connection with letters, there is a huge contemplation in there. So for example, the number 6 considered is the first perfect number. That's to say, it is its constituent elements are 1 times 2 times 3. The first 3 numbers multiplied together. But it's also 1 plus 2 plus 3. That's what the Greeks knew this number. The second number is 28. Why are these numbers important? For Ibn Arabi, tremendously important. The number 6 is the letter waw, which is the last vocalization possible in the human voice. It's on the lips at the end. Nothing more can you do after that. You can't make a letter afterwards. So it represents for him what is the last of creation? The perfect man. So the number representing number 6 represents the perfect human being. So 6 times 6, well, we have all sorts of things in there. That's one way to look at this. But I wrote to a friend of mine in Algeria who wrote me a very long paper in Arabic with far more explanations of 36 than I could even begin to get into myself. But I mentioned, Surah Yaseen, center of the Quran, 36. So when he says 36 days, is it 36 days as we know days, or is it something else? This is where you have to be very, very careful in the study of Ibn Arabi, not to jump to a conclusion and say, this is what it means. Because maybe tomorrow you'll go, this is what it means. And you can be right in both cases, but you'll say, well, actually there might be more. There might be something deeper. So you always have to have this caution about saying, it's this. Well, it's this and it's that, and it's more. Thank you for the question.
My dearest friend has come here, and this is a blessing for us. I consider him a hero because about Ibn Arabi, he works on Ibn Arabi about all the works that have been done on Arabi. I was first very surprised, first, because even though we live in a place where Ibn Arabi lived, we don't have an Ibn Arabi society, so we actually learn from them. So one can understand that wherever the knowledge is, we can take it. So the sun can rise from the west, so we can actually take the knowledge from them too. I can see that Stephen has devoted all his life to this knowledge, and if there is a saint that we are working on, this is the permission given by Ibn Arabi, which means Ibn Arabi has chosen Stephen to work on him. So that's why Stephen has got a very special importance for me. I hope that we will be able to serve together for more important things. If you know better English, for example, inshallah, you can actually give speeches, give lectures in the conferences that we organize together. All 90% of the Anatolian Evliyas come from the school of Ibn Arabi. So we can actually work on their relationship. So here we can see a sultan who talks about the symbols of symbols, and for even one number we can see how much we can learn, as Stephen has mentioned. So there is a request from me. Harvard University actually offered us to have a conference and to commemorate Kenan Rifai in Harvard. We're hoping to have that program next year, in September in 2019. Maybe after that program, we may have such a conference on Kenan Rifai's perspective on Ibn Arabi in Oxford. We can talk about it together, Stephen and I, and we can talk and analyze and see how the Sufis in Anatolia come from the school of Ibn Arabi, what their relationship is. And Ibn Arabi, one of the greatest sultans of this world. I am so thankful to Stephen, who has devoted all his life to such a sultan. His works are, may Allah let us serve like servants without seeing our own selfhood. And I would like to thank Stephen very much from the bottom of my heart. National League of Ibn Arabi.